morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we're very glad to have you with us on this ride we're going to be taking for the next hour here at allpointstv.com, and also at the great radio station 92.1, that's WFOV. And I was speaking to the persons that are on the program that precedes this program on Saturday at WFOV, and I was just saying how glad I am to have a program that quality that is an intro to what we do here at this studio. They're doing a great job over there, and it's really an honor to be a partner to those many persons that are bringing quality programs to the city. And I guess I was saying that I would like to see that studio's voltage go up, because they really need to have a more national audience, and they're doing some great things over there.
Now, do you have a difficulty, because you live kind of further out? Do you have a difficulty hearing that out there where you're at?
I can pick it up once I start driving toward the studio. You know, the studio is over on where was that I saw the? It's over on University Drive.
Right. It used to be. I think that used to be Third Avenue.
Third Avenue used to be on. Used to be called. I just found that out the other day, because we do our taping here, and we are farming out to that station. I passed by the other day and I said, "Oh, that's where it is." But I want to commend them, because I think that they're making a lot of positive impact on the community. And Paul Herring, Paul Herring is one of those persons that's everything that's going on positive in the community. You can believe that somewhere he's around, either as a spectator or he's involved in the production. And I want to commend him for the fine job he's doing. I'm coming here today to talk about South Africa, but before I get to South Africa, because I'll be talking about some of the corruptions involved in what is being proposed there. But I want to talk about some corruption that went on this past weekend. And John, I don't know if you're a fight fan or not, but I'm a fight fan. And everybody's talking about what occurred in the fight I think it was in Brooklyn this past weekend, the fight between Deontay Wilder and his opponent, who was the most dynamic opponent he had up to date, Luis Ortiz. And everybody's talking about the knockout that occurred in the 10th round, and that was an indication of the kind of power this Deontay Wilder has. But I think that the mere fact that nobody's talking about this other issue that came up in that fight shows you the kind of corruptions in boxing, because this should be the storyline for the day, not the fact that the man was knocked out in the 10th round. The question is, how did he get there to the 10th round in the first place? And this shows again that boxing is a corrupt sport. I've seen it. We've been down this road before. And in the 7th round, Deontay Wilder was out on his feet, and you could tell that he had really been hurt in the 7th round by him stumbling back to his corner. And during that 1 minute break between the rounds, you could see that they were trying to revive this guy, because he'd taken some really heavy blows. These are heavyweights fighting, and this guy that was beating on him in the 7th round came in at 238 pounds, and Deontay Wilder came in, I think it was, at 218 pounds, maybe at 214. Some were saying that this was the lightest weight he's ever fought at. Anyway, in the 7th round, Deontay Wilder was really bombarded with a number of punches, and he was really out on his feet. Went back to his corner, and they had a real task in their hand to get him ready for the next round. But that's not really the storyline here. What the storyline is that when that bell sounded, the referee took Wilder by his hand and took him over to the medical practitioners to have them do a check of the fighter. So it postponed the 8th round by about 15 to 20 seconds, which allowed Deontay Wilder to recuperate. You may not have seen that this was unseemly to the average viewer, and certainly nobody's talking about this today. But to those of us who are watching it with a more jaundiced eye, and we are watching things from every aspect of the game. I had never seen that done before, in terms of a person being hurt in the previous round, and you carry him over to the doctor to look into his eyes as he comes out for the next round. I'm gonna tell you something. I have never seen that happen before. And the reason why it is such an unusual thing to have occurred is because if the cornermen, who are the ones that are looking out for their fighter, sends him back out there, then that is the fact that the corner has made a determination for the fight to continue. Unless there's a cut that the doctor is looking at, then you don't stop the fight in between rounds. In terms of the person coming out there being sent out by his corner, and you take him over there to the doctor and have the doctor look in his eyes and all of that as a delaying tactic, and that's all it was. This referee was interfering in this fight, and nobody is talking about that in the aftermath of this fight, in which Deontay Wilder won because his victory was aided by the referee, and there's a reason for it. This fight is the first of two fights this month. One of the fights that is going to happen later on is a fight between Anthony Joshua, who is one of the title holders. I think he has two belts. He's fighting another title holder, the one that has the WBO belt, and that's Joseph Parker, and that's going to be another shootout. These four fighters, the one that fought this past weekend, and then the two fighters fighting the 31st of this month, Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua, those two fighters, plus the two that fought this past weekend, are the four greatest heavyweights in the world right now. And they're getting ready for a mega fight, a $100 million fight. I don't think this fight would be that you would be paying less than $100 on pay-per-view for this upcoming fight. And that's why this referee was interfering in this fight, because the winner of the fight this past weekend and the winner of the fight on the 31st of this month between Parker and Anthony Joshua, the two winners are going to be fighting a mega fight probably somewhere around November. It might be in May, but I think it's probably going to be more the last part of the year to build up this fight. And if Wilder loses, all of that hoopla about this fight goes down the drain. It is not that the referee is being told to intervene in the fight, but being aware of the magnitude of the issue that's involved in this fight, along with the ones coming up. This referee, on his own, interfered in the outcome of this fight. I don't think that Deontay Wilder could have continued, given the state he was in the seventh round that ended the way it did. And then to have the referee to give him another 15 to 20 seconds before the eighth round started was very objectionable. And I don't think that was because of the taking him over to the doctor. I have never seen that go on unless there was a cut. And you're raising a question about the bleeding of the person, and is that person capable, because of the blood that is being shed, unable to continue? But that was not the issue here. The issue here was a person was out on his feet, and that's what boxing is about. The guy comes out in the next round. The referee watches it very carefully. He's unable to continue, gets hit with a blow that he doesn't see, and he doesn't have defense against other blows coming in. You stop the fight. That's the referee's job. But to take the man over after he's been clocked in the previous round and carry him over to the medical officials and have him checked out, and is not a cut issue, show me where this happened before. And the corruption of boxing continues. I remember another fight in which I don't know if a person remember that fight between Holyfield and Mike Tyson, the one where Mike Tyson got in there with another guy that answered the bully's call. You know, when you're a bully, and the person that is in the ring with you, and you've been bullying all these other opponents, and you get in there with someone who is used to bullies, and is not being bullied by your presence in that ring, and you get in there, then it's a character issue. And Mike Tyson showed that he didn't have any character. bit the man's ear off. And if you remember that fight, Mills, the one used to say, "Let's get it on." Mills was, when you bite a person in the ring, would you say that's a foul that's unconscionable and therefore there's an automatic disqualification if you bite a guy's ear off? Mills got ready to disqualify the guy, and one of the agents got up there on the ring apron and called Mills over, and they had a conversation. People had paid. It was a pay-per-view fight, so they paid big money for it, but there should have been disqualification. And he called the referee over and they talked, and Mills changed his mind and did not disqualify Mike Tyson. They went back to fighting again, and Mike Tyson bit his other ear off. Mills retired after that fight was over. He never refereed another fight because the corruption, when you find some corruption and you have any kind of virtue, you either raise the objection to it and take it to the legal arena and call attention to it, or you do what Mills did. And what Mills did is that he never refereed another fight. And so we've been there before. This is not something that just happened the first time this past weekend, and nobody's talking about that, and that's the second scandal, because that should be, along with talking about the knockout that occurred, they should be talking that as well. Okay, I just wanted to bring that about.
I'm 54. I'm 54 years old, and I've never remember, though, or boxing was actually a sport that I would consider to be corruption-free. I've never heard of that.
Right.
I mean, there's like so many movies and so many TV series where they had bad, a shady promoter, a shady,
Right.
through. I mean, so it was so pulp for the grist for the mill on the small screen, as they'd call it. What set the standard? Was it the TV shows and the movies depicting as that, or were they reflecting what was really going on in the boxing world? Because I have never heard of it being corruption-free, even as a kid. I never
Jack Johnson and Willard, that fight between Jack Johnson and Willard, where they fight down in Cuba. They got Jack Johnson out of the country, won't let him back in the country. They go and fight down in Cuba, and this controversial fighter, the first black heavyweight champion, who won the championship, I think, in 1909. And here's Willard knocking Jack Johnson down, and Jack Johnson holds his hand over his forehead because of the sun glare. And he takes a dive, and after he loses the championship, then he's allowed to come back into the country. So a deal was being made there, and Jack Johnson threw that fight. There's no doubt about that. Now we have all of the documentation to show that fight was in fact thrown. And sometimes you watch these fights, and you hear the scorecards. In fact, on that scorecard this past weekend, they had Wilder ahead in the fight before the fight was stopped because he did knock the guy out in the 10th round. But the fact of the matter is they had him win the fight anyway. And there's no doubt about the fact that Wilder lost the first 4 rounds because he didn't throw any punches. He was waiting for this guy who claims he was 38 years old to tire. And you look at Ortiz. I've been 38 years old. I didn't look like that at 38. I looked that way at 45. And this guy could not possibly be what he claimed to have been. But he waited for him to tire, and so he lost the earlier rounds. He lost, and even the commentators were saying that he lost the first 4 rounds because he wasn't throwing any punches. I think he threw 4 punches in the first four rounds. They had him winning the fight at the time of the stoppage. So he was, unless Ortiz knocked Wilder out, he was not going to get the decision. And John was saying this a minute ago, and I agree with that. I've seen some fights when I was asking the question, what fight were they watching? Because they'll have one guy winning unanimous verdict, and you wonder where did that come from? The guy was getting clocked in there. And it's all about the money. Talk about, and by the way, have you ever heard them say money corrupts? I was talking about these, power corrupts. They'll talk about, but they never talk about politics corrupts. Money corrupt. You never hear that going on, because what that does, it draws you to some particular people, doesn't it? It begins to become much more of a specific allegation of the corruption. So you're never going to hear them say politics corrupts or money corrupts, because you're then looking at who's paying the money out, who's receiving the money. So they're not corrupting agents. But power, power is like invisible, right? So you say power. This is Lord Acton again. Power tends to corrupt. Well, does money tend to corrupt? What about greed? Does greed tend to corrupt? No. What about politics? Where you like in Washington, the swamp? Does that tend to corrupt? No, you don't. You don't hear that conversation, and it's because the fact is that you can then put a face on it. With power, what face you put on power, and so it's like you are sidestepping the issue here. And I haven't heard anybody raise this question today about the influence of this referee who should be disbarred. And so you're hearing it here. Let's see if anyone else is going to pick this up and have this conversation, because if you really are going to pay money for an outcome, let the outcome be decided by the combatants who train hard, put a lot of hours into it. And when you get in the ring, it should be between the participants and the third party that put no sweat equity into the outcome. Determining the outcome is unfathomable.
I don't understand how anybody can take that kind of a pounding, though. I mean, I've been in street, fights, and getting hit 2 or 3 times in the face. That's face. You're hearing your ears roar. You're disoriented,
right?
And I don't know how they can withstand that much of pummeling, man. I really don't, because let's face it. I wasn't devastated. I mean, I lost some fights, won some, or drawed, or the fight ended because somebody came out and stopped it. But I don't know how they could do that, man, for hours. I had a friend who trained, like a guy I went to school with. He trained for Golden Gloves around here. And he first bout, he said he got in the mat and he got in the ring. He got clocked a couple of times. He said, "I'm out of here." He just walked off. He just walked out of the ring, man. He said, "I can't handle this, man. I just can't handle this." I don't see how they could take that much of a beating, man. I really don't.
Yeah, and that's why it should be determined by the fighters. You put so much time into getting prepared for the fight. And if you had excellent conditioning, then you withstand those blows. And the last man standing, or the first one to get his punch in, and he's able to land the first significant punch and turn the bout in his favor, that person comes out on top. But you don't want to see a third party taking none of the blows, determining the outcome of a fight. And that's what happened this past Saturday. And we should have an investigation, which you're not going to have because the dollars is involved in it. And they're talking about a mega fight coming up, and I'm going to predict the fight's going to take place in November. I was watching it with some friends, and I saw the outcome before it occurred, because I don't watch a lot of sports, and I'm certainly not going to sit there and watch basketball for the whole season. And those guys are playing 82 games in the regular season, then got to play the playoffs, and I'm sitting there with all these hours invested in watching basketball, and then the outcome of the championship is determined by another possible 7 games, because it's a 4 out of 7 series if it goes the whole 9 yards. And I'm going to sit there and watch all those games and waste all my time. I like the sport where the determination of the championship is in the 36 minutes plus the other 11 minutes in between the rounds. If it goes 12 rounds, I like to have it determined within the hour, so I can watch 1 hour in boxing and determine the champion within the same day and within the same hour of that day. I like it because of that reason. But I am not going to be watching football all season and be there every Sunday on the couch watching 3 hours of football and have to watch all the commercials. I'm not doing that. I don't have time for that. So I guess that's why boxing is my favorite sport. But I want it to be a sport, and I want it to be a contact sport, and I don't want the ones that are not making contact determining the outcome or who the champion is going to be. I want a real champion here. And I didn't get a real champion because the referee interfered. And I want to see if there's going to be anybody discussing this, if there's going to be any suspension of this jerk. And I've seen that before many times, like John was saying. But it's just a corrupt sport. Boxing is corrupt. And I'm not saying that they don't have corruption otherwise in some of the other sports, but in boxing, you see it up close and personal. These referees, these judges determining the outcome of a fight and telling us a person won, and therefore our eyes were lying for 48 minutes.
I always thought that. I seen the guy get slammed, beaten bad, and then they declared the winner. I went, how? Well, it's a technicality. The technicality, he was getting his butt kicked. I mean, and I said, but he didn't do this many blows. I said, he got his butt kicked, all right? And you're saying he's the winner.
Yeah,
right.
It's like the guy go back to his corner and they're saying he never laid a glove on you. And then the guy says in the corner, his eyes swollen up, he says, well, somebody need to watch that referee. Somebody's kicking his behind. It's just sad to see that. I don't think it's sportsmanlike to kind of have it so that the winner is not determined by the sportsmanship of those that are involved in what is a sport, and therefore sportsmanship of the sport is what you should depend upon. It has to have integrity, and it didn't have that Saturday. And this referee, I would like to see this man suspended. Quite frankly, I hope I'm leading the way for the call of investigation of this fight, because that never should have happened. Okay, well, I'm talking about corruption here, so that's what I came to the studio to talk about. And I'm going to talk about it in our next topic as well, because what I really came to the studio to talk about today was South Africa. You know, I told you last week that I was in South Africa for a week. I went there on the, I started out in my travels on the 8th was it the 8th? No, that's when I went to Washington, to the museum in Washington. I left here going to South Africa on the, I guess it was the 8th of February, because I got there on the 10th. And I was there from the 10th of, because I was traveling 2 days. I went there from the 10th, which was on a Saturday, and came back on the 17th, and left out of South Africa on the following Saturday, but got back here on the 19th because I went around the Horn. I went from the Horn. I went from the southern tip of Africa, around the Horn of Africa, going around Ethiopia to Qatar, which is in the Middle East, quote unquote. They call it the Middle East, and from there Chicago, and then back to Flint. 2 days of traveling to South Africa, 2 days of traveling back from South Africa. And I was there for two reasons. I went there first to see what had happened. What amounted to 4 presidents at that time, but later on 5 presidents. By the time I got back, they got rid of the 4th president, and they had installed another president while I was there. And I went there to see what the country was doing 4 presidents after the end of apartheid in South Africa. I want to see just what was going on in South Africa, during the post-apartheid period. Since everybody was complaining about how South Africa was being run because of apartheid, and everybody was taking some ownership of changing the landscape politically in South Africa, given the fact that there was this racial behemoth that they had in place in that government. So I went to see what it looks like now, 4 presidents removed from the apartheid period, to see how they're faring in the aftermath of that coming to a close, and have they made the most of the chance they now have to prove that a country that was taken over on the continent of Africa, that was the 3rd wealthiest country on the continent based on GDP, how well was it going now that we've had Mandela, we had Mbeki, we had Tambo, Oliver Tambo. We had a president that was in there for a very short period of time. I think he was in there as the interim president. They got him out of there. He wasn't ANC, so they got him out of there. And then they had Jay-Z, South Africa's own Jay-Z, Jacob Zuma. And while I was there, he was recalled. Jacob Zuma was forced to stand down. And then they installed the deputy president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And we need to talk about what's going on here, because the press is not covering what's going on right now in South Africa, because there has been a news out. You're talking about fake news. Fake news can be what you report in the newspaper. It can also be what's not reported, as if it's not occurring. And that's fake news also. So there are not too many people talking about what's happening in South Africa right now. But I went back and read the Constitution of South Africa again, the one that was drawn up in 1996. It was patterned after some things that were already in the constitutional language prior to the takeover of the ending of apartheid and the takeover of South Africa by the ANC, in which Mandela became the first president in the state that had majority rule. Okay, we're going to stop at this point and let WFOV identify itself, and we'll come back. They'll come back in 4 minutes. Looking forward to that, and they'll take a break at this time. I want to thank you for staying tuned here at allpointstv.com, and we're going to continue what we're doing here, but they will be joining us again. John will let us know when they come back in from their 4-minute break. I wanted to cover South Africa because I went back and read the Constitution again. You know, South Africa had an addendum to their Constitution. They pretty much drew up a whole new Constitution and patterned after some of the things that were had in place, but because of the majoritarian nature of the society now, and supposedly decided now in the post-apartheid period, then the Constitution was changed to deal with the majoritarian aspect of the country at that time. So you would think then that the Constitution would reflect that, and it would be more of a egalitarian document. But really, when you read it very carefully, not so much. I mean, there are a lot of little caveats in there that are not picked up. And I want to make this point also. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, John, remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg comments, you know, when she came back and said that the Constitution of the United States is outdated?
Yeah, I remember saying that, yeah.
You know what she was referring to and why she was saying that? Because she read the Constitution in South Africa. That's what she was referring to. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg, being a dingbat, we don't have anything that she's written that would stun anybody by her legalese. And she said that the South African Constitution makes the Constitution we have here in the United States outdated. The reason why she would say that is because she did not read the document as carefully as she should. She read the document. I read the document also. And what she got carried away with is that the Constitution in South Africa celebrates its diversity to the point of a virtuous flaw. It recognizes 11 national languages, 11 national languages out of the 9 provinces that you have in South Africa. Nothing wrong with the recognition of the 9 provinces, but when you have 11 languages that you're recognizing as the official language of the country, what you're doing there is that you are in fact patronizing all of the groups, because you know that in your heart of heart you don't have an agreement of which of the groups in the post-apartheid period should run South Africa. So then the way it works in South Africa now is that you have the ANC running it, because the ANC is a galvanizing party through which all of the power runs through the ANC, because they don't have agreement on which of the ethnic populations in fact should be running it, because they're celebrating diversity to the fault of the country being unified. And it's a false unity around what? Because there's no ethnic unity in terms of having the country non-racialized and not running of an ethnic unity. In terms of the country just being South Africans, they are South Africans, whether they're white, whether they're black, whether they're Zulu, whether they're Hausa, or some of the other groups. Rather than it being that, they are running it based. Okay, the WFOV is coming back at this time. Glad to have you back, and we're not very far from where we were when you left 4 minutes ago, and we're very glad you came back to the program. I want to talk about this a little bit because I want to tell you what I saw when I was there. And also, what the Constitution is, what's happening right now as far as the South African Constitution is concerned, what it says, and how it has various flaws in its expression. For example, one thing that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our on associate justice on the Supreme Court here, who was downing the Constitution in this country and saying that the model Constitution is in South Africa. And if you read it, yeah, you'll say it's a very progressive Constitution, but you have to read the caveats in it. For example, it says that only reasonable discrimination will be allowed. And what they mean by reasonable discrimination is that discrimination that the state determines is okay in terms of discriminating against certain citizens against some other citizens. So in the Constitution, they built in discriminatory conduct based upon the state giving license to it, and that is written in the Constitution in at least 3 or 4 places that I found it in, and it probably in some other areas as well, because I did fast reading in terms of going through the document. But that document is a very progressive document, and it has a lot of problem areas.
You know, I'm just observation here. I'm reading a book called Being in Time by a man named Gilad Atzmon. He wrote a book called Wandering Who, and basically because he was a Jew that was raised in Israel and now lives in England, and he's an anti-Zionist Jew. But he also writes about the Being in Time, which has got the same name of the book by Martin Heidegger that written years ago, but it's the same title. But it actually has kind of. But he's always this is an off branch when they're talking about the South African Constitution, and it seems Ginsburg's all bored of this, is that she's also tied to this identity politics. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand that a person should be looking at their own interest economically and their place in the society, and that's going to be a play, but they're going to try to manage, they think, by saying, well, we're going to have this shared power, but this group's going to have this much power, this group said it's not going to work out that way. And it seems like that's what I'm looking through that lens, perhaps, so maybe I'm flawed in my thinking, because I was just reading that before that.
No, you're not flawed in your thinking, and they are on a collision course with their future, and it's only a matter of time before they get there. John, they are making the same mistake in South Africa that they made in Haiti. You're quoting a book. Let me quote another book, and that's a book called In the Course of Human Events, written by Charles Adams. And in that book, he talks about what occurred in Haiti during the Haitian Revolution that occurred in you could say it started in 1791, and it went on until 1804 when the revolution was really over. And we all talk about the revolution. We don't talk about the aftermath of it. I mean, they'll talk. I go to these conferences. They talk about Boukman, Biassou, Dessalines, and Christophe, and of course the one that was the person that came into the leadership in the aftermath of it. He wasn't at the outset, but he came in and began to show leadership when the revolution was in full vogue, and that's Toussaint Louverture. And they talk about the heroic things that occurred in the overthrow of the French, Napoleon Bonaparte, and that army that was sent there to quell their rebellion in Haiti. What they don't talk about is when the revolution was over, what occurred there in terms of the desecration and decimation and decimation of the ruling class, where every one of those persons that were on that island that had been the rulers before the revolution occurred were in fact destroyed, were killed. And they killed the whole artisan class of that country. And Haiti, as quiet as it's kept, has not recovered yet. And that would have been 1804. How many years would it be from 1804 to 2018? You can see that Haiti's condition, the suffering that's going on there. Nobody is talking about how that suffering that's going on in Haiti right now is not the earthquake. The recovery has not occurred because he has never recovered from the devastation that it brought at his own hands. And South Africa did not learn anything from that because they're making the same mistake right now. And Zimbabwe is another example of it, and they didn't learn anything from Zimbabwe. Under Robert Mugabe, who went down the same road in 1980. Mugabe is also guilty of this malfeasance as an office holder.
You know, it's to me it goes back to what Nietzsche talks about, the idea of resentment. Now, I can understand them resenting the colonizers. I can understand that. I've never been in the position to be, you know, my ancestors were colonized, but we didn't, you know, that wasn't passed on to me. You know, we didn't hear this anger or this angst about that. But when they resent everything that was established, they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The British, for example, were occupied by the Romans. They didn't throw everything the Romans actually created in England at the time. They didn't do it because there's a gradual withering away of the Roman state, the Roman Empire. But there's a lot of matter of fact, there was a great horrible things happening, a great number of horrible things happening when that was happening. So basically, but the stuff that the model that they set in, the Romans set in, was largely drawn from by the people of those lands to actually, and they stopped up a lot of the bad stuff that could have happened. So I mean, just throwing things out with the bathwater because you're the original oppressors or the colonizers did that is just short-sighted.
It's short-sighted, and it also does not take into consideration the dichotomy of why a revolution is invoked. I mean, why do you fight a revolution? You fight a revolution for one of two reasons. This is what John Paul Sartre wrote about. You either are fighting the revolution in order to redeem your humanity, and in the process redeem the humanity of the conquering party, because both of their humanity has been debilitated by the colonial circumstance. Or you fight a revolution to replace the oppressor and put your own oppression in place. And if you look in Haiti, if you look in Zimbabwe, and you look in South Africa right now, you have a colonizing influence in terms of Mugabe. Just because you're the same color does not mean that the state is free because it's being run by blacks. There's as much apartheid in Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe as it was under Ian Smith. And anyone that says otherwise need to go read Meredith's book on Mugabe, where they were telling Mugabe worse than Smith, because Ian Smith was the president of Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, prior to Mugabe coming into power in 1980. And when Robert Mugabe came in there, Robert Mugabe threw the farmers off the land and put non-producers on the land, and those non-producers led to the kind of condition that we find in Zimbabwe, named after the great Zimbabwe of the medieval period. They're going to name the country after that, but they were not the great Zimbabwe that they were mimicking in 1980. And you go there right now, and all you see are the things that Mugabe has been doing for the last, from 1980 to 2018, the last 38 years. Go and see that. And I said that when I was in South Africa in 2007, we got into a shouting match down there because I was in those seminars. And I was telling not that I'm some expert on everything, but I was telling the government officials in these conferences. We were in these conferences supposed to learn about South Africa. And I was telling this one guy that was over the redistribution of land that you can make the same mistake that Mugabe made. And he started shouting, and so I started shouting, and he was saying, I didn't come here to talk about Mugabe. I said, I didn't either, but you raised a question there, and I want you to be aware of something. You're going down the same pathway, and you're not going to go down the same pathway and have a different outcome. The outcome that you saw in Zimbabwe has been repeated before in Haiti. If you make the same mistake, you get the same outcome. It will not be different. And that's what's happening right now in South Africa. What's happening in South Africa right now, and when I was there, I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, most of the young people, who were right on top of what's going on there. It was amazing, some of the things they were saying. One person told me that South Africa was in better shape, in better condition when there was apartheid, because although they had apartheid, they didn't have all this other stuff here. In other words, in apartheid, the whites were benefiting from it, but the blacks were benefiting from it too. And that's why blacks were coming into South Africa from other parts of Africa, from Mozambique, for example. I'm not making a case for apartheid. What I'm saying here is that under apartheid, there was not the looting of the treasury, as it is right now, because the whites were holding the government accountable. Yeah, they were benefiting through the apartheid state, but the looting of the treasury was not going on, and they were not allowed to use the national treasury as a private part of their income. They were not doing that. And what they're doing under the ANC is that those persons are looting the treasury, shamelessly doing so, and that is going to bring South Africa to a heel if they don't get their act together. And there's not a whole lot of time to do so. South Africa right now has the third largest economy in Africa. I was very impressed with the infrastructure of South Africa. And I was in Durban, South Africa, by the way, which is the prototype of this movie that they have out right now called The Black Panther. Those persons that have seen that movie have been so engrossed with the movie but don't understand the storyline really comes out of Shaka Zulu. In fact, they call the person in that film, they call him T'Chaka. They were taking it from the Zulu, the greatest of the Zulu rulers, Shaka, who was the son of Sinzang Gakona. And that fighting in that film, where they had the eventual ruler come out on top of the fighting for the crown, they had him fighting his was it his nephew or his cousin? It wasn't fighting his brother, but in the Shaka Zulu story, you see Shaka fighting Sajana, Sijuana, and his other brother Zwadi, whom he laughed at because once he killed Sajana, then Shaka allowed his other brother to live. That was a big mistake because later on, that is going to be the death knell of Shaka. Shaka was born in 1787, and he died in 1828. That storyline is what you're looking at in that film called The Black Panther. Of course, they put a lot of Hollywood theatrics with it, but that's really the story they're actually telling there in terms of the fight that went on between the combatants fighting for the throne. My point is this, though. In Durban, where you have the Kwa Natal group, the Zulus are there in that city, and also the second highest number of Indians are in that city. South Africa has the largest number of Indians from India than any other part of the world. There's only one place that has more Indians in it than in Durban, South Africa, and that's in India. And I saw that also when I was there. In fact, one of the downfalls of Jacob Zuma was because of a group they called the Guptas, a family of brothers that went into South Africa in 1993, the Guptas, who saw in the transition that was taking place because they let Mandela out in 1990, 91, 92, when they let him out with the idea that he will eventually be the galvanizing influence and run for president and would be a uniting force around the country in the post-apartheid period. The Guptas over in India saw an opportunity there, and in 1983 they immigrated into South Africa, and they came in with a business background, and they will come in and they will influence their government with their monetary might, and they were paying off Jacob Zuma and his corrupt government was such that after they were getting Zuma out of office, they went after the Guptas, and those guys are now, facing, jail term. Why? Because they were Zuma's corrupt agents, and not the corrupt agents, the ones in power right now. So it looks like reform going on down there, but there is no reform going on here. You just got another corrupt party in there, and they're using the land question as a distraction in South Africa to continue the looting that's going on under the ANC. And I make that charge because I have the evidence to back it up. The ANC is a problem in South Africa. And until they get the ANC, which has been a one-party monopoly, South Africa is going the way of Zimbabwe. And you can take that to the bank. If that doesn't change, and change in a hurry in South Africa, then the economy is going right downhill. And I was listening to the comments made by the president who was installed, been in there now for about 3 weeks. And that person is Cyril Ramaphosa. He's saying that what they're discussing right now is the appropriation of land from the white South Africans. And I was listening to him say that they have to do it in a way in which it does not interfere with the food security of the country. In other words, What he's talking about is, he's not talking about not appropriating the land, to take the land out of the hands of the white South African farmers. What he's talking about is they are going to do that, but in taking the land, they want to make sure that there's the farming that goes on that will continue to produce the kind of agricultural product that's been produced under the time when the tutelage of the farms are being handled by the whites. The problem with that is that, and one other point's got to be made here. They want to go back to 1913 when the land was put in the hands of white farmers in that year. The ANC was founded in 1912, and so then the land acquisition in 1913. The problem is that they want to talk about the farms as if those are the lands developed that were taken over in 1913. My point is that if you want to heal the situation, you then allow the land that's undeveloped, which is what it was in 1913 when the whites took it over at that time. You take other land in South Africa, and they have a lot of land that's undeveloped. I know that because I rented a car and drove throughout Durban, South Africa. And that's just one part of South Africa. You can go to any part of South Africa and see land that is sitting idle and not in production that can be developed. But they're not talking about that. They want to make it seem like this land that's developed was a land that was taken over in 1913 when the whites took it over. That's not what occurred. Whites developed that land, and that land is very productive right now. Nothing keeps the government from expanding upon the capitalist model that is there. What you can do is allow the land that's being productive right now productively used, then let the other owners, other person have land, and let them develop the land that's been developed by the group previous to that. But they're not talking about that. What they're talking about is going back to the Constitution, and I have it right here, the Constitution, and changing the Constitution that will allow them to do what the Constitution does not right now allow them to do. Here's in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution, which has 36 clauses to it. In clause 25, there's a property clause, and here's what it says in the property clause. No one may be deprived of property except in terms of law of general application, and no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property. Property may be expropriated only in terms of law of general application, for a public purpose or in the public interest, and subject to compensation, the amount of which and the time and manner of payment of which have either been agreed to by those affected or decided or approved by a court. That's not what Cyril Ramaphosa is talking about. They were talking in the parliament about the expropriation of the land without compensation.
What year was the ANC created then? So we always
1912.
see. I was always in the impression. I don't know where I got it from. Probably because because the way the news presented it, the ANC came into existence out of this urgent need because of the way they were marginalized or something like that back in the 80s, back when the apartheid movement, the anti-apartheid movement
was struggle part
created. Yeah, but I see I didn't know it went that far back.
You went back to 1912, and it was not called the ANC at that time. It wasn't called the ANC until 1923. But you can say that the genesis of it, since it was a parent of the ANC, you can say it started in 1912 because it's just a continuation of the same, struggle that was going on.
But typically, the ANC is comprised of people of Bantu, aren't they? The people of this.
You can say Bantu. Their largest group right now is the Zulu group. Jacob is Zulu, and that was over the government in the South African government. Jacob is Zulu, and Cyril Ramaphosa is let's see, He's in another ethnic group, but all of them, but everybody has been president. They've had 5 post-apartheid president. Every last one of them is ANC. Here's the danger. Let me get to the danger. Now we're talking about property being expropriated by the state. Now the Constitution, which is Section 25 of the Bill of Rights, it says that no one may be deprived of property, and if they are deprived of the property by the state, then it says here it must be subject to the compensation, the amount of which and the time and manner of payment of which have either been agreed to by those affected. So those who own the land and those who are taking the land must come to terms upon the compensation package. But what Cyril Ramaphosa is talking about is, and this is why it's so dangerous, he's talking about appropriating the land without compensation, taking the land and not compensating the proprietors of the land. And if you do that, then where does that end, you think? When you weaken property rights, you weaken personal and individual rights at the same time, because all individual rights, as been proven throughout history, all individual rights are based upon property rights. If there are no property rights, there are no individual rights either. And they're going down this path. Now, in order to do what they're talking about doing, they have to amend this Constitution. And so what they've done is they assigned a group to go out and do the research on what it will take to amend the Constitution to allow them to do what they're doing. Now, there's a guy down there who is and I'm going to say this out front, and I know the feedback I'll get from it, but I'm that kind of a person. You have this person that's in South Africa, Julius Malema, who is a black racist, and I'm against racism, and I'm against racism whether it's by blacks or whites, and he's a black racist down there who said that we don't need to kill off the whites yet. He's over the party down there called the EFF, the Economic, the EFF is the Economic Freedom, another F is in there, another name for it. I can't think of that part right now, escapes me at this point, but there's the EFF, and Malema is the head of that party, and they control 6.4% of the government in the parliament. The ANC controls 62%. So Malema and Cyril Ramaphosa they've agreed to join together for this appropriation of the land, but they must amend the Constitution in order to do it, because the Constitution does not allow them to take property without compensation, and the party whose land is being taken must agree upon the price of the land. They're not talking about that. They both said they're going to take the land without compensation. In other words, government theft being legalized by the Constitution they intend to draft. So you got a committee right now getting ready to study the Constitution, how to change it, so that it will allow them to do what the Constitution does not at this point allow them to do. Now, with 62% in the hands of the government being controlled by the ANC, and a 6.4% being controlled by the EFF group, that gives them 68% of the parliament. And therefore, it takes a 2/3 vote to amend the Constitution, so you're going to have the votes in order to do it. But they cannot do that right now based upon the Constitution that the woman that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the one that was saying how pleased she was with this progressive Constitution, greater than our Constitution, with all kinds of caveats in it now, that she didn't look at. If they amend that Constitution that allow them to steal this land, and then they amend it so that theft can be sanctified by the state, is that the kind of Constitution you want? One that weakens the right to private property ownership in the country?
It's typical on the progressives or
This is
left.
very dangerous
They
stuff.
they have a hard time with property rights. They kind of poop on it. They kind of make a sense of like, it's just selfishness. Property rights. Well, Nozick, the Robert Nozick, came back in the 70s, was the first one to actually set that on a position actually was respectable. Made property rights respectable because he enlisted his medicine was that's the basis of all other rights is recognition that people have rights to property. If you don't have the right to property, then you don't have any rights at all because all of the rights that you have as an individual comes out of your right to own and control your own property. If you don't have property, go to those socialist countries.
And look at why those countries are devastated. Look at Venezuela as the latest example of it. Where there is a removal of property rights in any country, you have the weakening of the foundation of the country itself, and there's no individual rights in North Korea as a result of that, or any of these other things as far as that is concerned. And they're going down the same path. What I want persons to do is to continue to watch this situation developing, because it has tremendous potential to be the engine in which you can generate tremendous things for Africa, the continent of Africa. And if we're not paying attention to that because we're taking these sides, because we make it into a racial issue, then we're going to lose something very great here, and an opportunity to move the engine of Africa forward. And I don't want to see that happen. Ramaphosa, you got a task to do, and it is not what the road you're going down right now. And you have got to get control of what you're doing in that country, because you're going to run another experiment as Mugabe did in Zimbabwe. Okay, we got to get out of here. We want you to continue to follow all of your dreams, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.